Introduction. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you had all the right answers, yet somehow no one remembered what you said? You replay every moment. I should have explained it better. Why did they listen to everyone else, but not me? Now imagine two people entering the same room. The first begins speaking immediately. They talk longer. They explain everything. They try to convince everyone. When they're finished, the room quickly moves on. A few moments later, someone else speaks. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a few calm, carefully chosen sentences. Suddenly, people stop checking their phones. Conversations fade away. Every eye turns toward them. Nothing magical happened. They simply understood something that most people never do. Real influence doesn't begin with words. It begins long before you ever open your mouth. It begins with the way you think, the way you organize ideas, the way you control your emotions when pressure appears, and the discipline to speak only after your mind becomes clear. Most people spend years trying to become better speakers. Very few spend time becoming better thinkers. Yet thinking is where every powerful conversation is born. Throughout this audiobook, you'll discover why some people naturally earn respect, why calm voices often carry more weight than loud ones, why silence can be more persuasive than endless explanations, and why the people with the greatest influence usually speak the least. Because before anyone can believe your words, your mind must believe them first. Chapter 1. Clear thinking comes before powerful speaking. Most people believe communication begins the moment they start talking. It doesn't. Communication begins much earlier, inside your own mind. Every sentence you speak, every opinion you defend, every answer you give is simply the final product of the thoughts that came before it. Imagine someone asking you a difficult question during a meeting. Without thinking, you begin answering immediately. Halfway through your explanation, you lose your train of thought. You repeat yourself. You add details that don't matter. By the time you finish, even you aren't completely sure what your point was. This happens every day. Not because people lack intelligence, but because they confuse speaking with thinking. Strong communicators understand something different. They think first, then they speak. That small habit changes everything. Your thoughts are like the foundation of a building. If the foundation is unstable, it doesn't matter how beautiful the building looks. Sooner or later, everything begins to crack. Words work exactly the same way. When your thinking lacks structure, your sentences begin wandering. Your explanations become longer. Your confidence slowly disappears. People often believe they are ignored because others aren't paying attention. Sometimes that's true, but far more often, people stop listening because they cannot follow the speaker's thinking. The human brain constantly searches for patterns, for order, for direction. When it cannot find those things, attention quietly disappears. Think about the last person who told you a story without any structure. They started talking about work, then suddenly mentioned their childhood. A minute later, they were discussing money. Then another unrelated story appeared. You probably found yourself wondering, where is this going? Eventually, you stopped listening. Not because the story was boring, because your mind became tired of searching for the point. Clear thinking prevents that from happening. Before every important conversation, ask yourself one simple question. If this person remembers only one idea, what should it be? Not 5 ideas, not 10, just one. Once that answer becomes clear, everything else becomes easier. You naturally remove unnecessary details. You stop trying to impress people with information. Instead, you guide them toward one clear conclusion. This is why the strongest communicators rarely speak the most. They simply know exactly where they're going before they begin. And that certainty allows every sentence to move in the same direction. People don't follow confusing thoughts, they follow clear ones. Clear thinking is not a talent, it is a discipline. And like every discipline, it becomes stronger every time you practice it. Chapter 2. Stop speaking to be liked. From the moment we're children, most of us are taught to seek approval. We learned that being agreeable earns praise, that saying the right thing keeps the peace, that fitting in feels safer than standing apart. Without realizing it, many people carry those habits into adulthood. They don't speak to express what they truly believe. They speak to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. At first, that seems harmless, but over time, approval quietly becomes a prison. Imagine you're sitting in a meeting. Someone shares an idea you completely disagree with. Almost everyone around the table nods. You hesitate. You know something doesn't make sense. Yet instead of saying what you're thinking, you smile and nod along with everyone else. The meeting ends. A week later, the decision fails for exactly the reasons you noticed. The opportunity to help disappeared. Not because you lacked knowledge, but because you chose comfort over honesty. Approval seeking rarely looks dramatic. It hides inside ordinary habits, adding unnecessary apologies, explaining yourself long after your point is already clear, laughing at jokes that aren't funny, agreeing simply because disagreement feels risky. Each action seems small, but together, they slowly teach people something about you. They teach them that your opinions change depending on who is listening. And when people sense that, trust becomes difficult. Think about the people you naturally respect. They aren't rude, they aren't aggressive, but they also don't bend every time the room changes direction. Their opinions remain steady, their words remain measured, whether 5 people agree with them or none at all. That consistency creates confidence, not only in themselves, but in everyone listening. Many people believe respect comes from making everyone happy. Real life usually proves the opposite. Respect grows when people know exactly where you stand, even if they don't always agree with you. Being respectful is not the same as needing approval. You can disagree without becoming disrespectful. You can remain calm without becoming passive. You can be kind without abandoning your own convictions. That balance is what gives your words weight. The desire to be liked often causes another problem: over-explaining. Imagine someone asks a simple question. Instead of giving a direct answer, you continue talking. You add more reasons, more details, more examples. Not because they're necessary, but because you're hoping they'll convince the other person to agree with you. Ironically, the longer you explain, the weaker your message often becomes. It's as though your own words are asking for permission to be believed. Confident people don't assume everyone will agree. They simply present their thoughts with clarity, then allow others to decide. That doesn't mean becoming stubborn. It means trusting that your ideas don't need endless protection. Another hidden sign of approval seeking is changing your personality depending on who you're around. With one group, you're outspoken. With another, you become almost silent. Around certain people, you pretend to enjoy things you actually dislike. Eventually, you begin wondering which version of yourself is real. Influential people rarely experience that confusion, not because they're perfect, but because they stop performing. They stop asking, what do these people want to hear? And begin asking, what do I genuinely believe is true? That single question changes everything. It removes pressure, it removes pretending, and it allows every conversation to become far more authentic. People can sense authenticity just as quickly. They can sense insecurity. One creates trust, the other creates doubt. The goal isn't to become someone everyone likes. That's impossible. The goal is to become someone people believe. Because when your words consistently match your convictions, influence stops feeling like something you force. It becomes something people naturally give you. Chapter 3. Master the power of timing. Imagine 2 people delivering the exact same message. They use the same words. They share the same idea. One is ignored. The other leaves a lasting impression. What changed? Not the message, the timing. Most people believe communication is about saying the right thing. In reality, saying the right thing at the wrong moment can be just as ineffective as saying the wrong thing. Think about the last time someone interrupted you. Before they even understood your point, they were already preparing their response. The conversation became a competition, not an exchange. Neither person was truly listening. Both were simply waiting for their turn to speak. That habit destroys influence. Strong communicators understand something most people overlook. Every conversation has a rhythm. When you rush, you break that rhythm. When you learn to control it, people naturally begin following your pace. Have you ever noticed how the calmest person in a tense room often becomes the one everyone watches? While others rush to defend themselves, they remain still. While voices grow louder, they become quieter. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand something important. Emotion demands speed. Wisdom demands patience. When someone asks you a difficult question, your first instinct is usually to answer immediately. Silence feels uncomfortable. You worry people will think you don't know the answer. But that brief moment of silence often communicates something entirely different. It tells people you're thinking, that you care more about giving the right answer than the fastest one. That simple pause creates confidence. Imagine a doctor delivering important news. Would you trust the one who blurts out the first words that come into their mind? Or the one who pauses, collects their thoughts, then speaks with calm certainty? Most people would choose the second, because composure creates credibility. The same principle applies everywhere, in business, in friendships, in leadership, even in ordinary conversations. People are constantly judging not only what you say, but how you arrive there. Another mistake many people make is allowing other people's urgency to become their own. Someone asks for an immediate answer. They pressure you to decide. They expect an instant reaction. Without realizing it, you begin operating on their schedule instead of yours. That is where mistakes happen. Not because you lack intelligence, but because pressure steals clarity. The most influential people rarely allow themselves to be rushed. They understand that urgency and importance are not the same thing. Some decisions deserve immediate action. Most deserve thoughtful consideration. Learning the difference is a powerful skill. There is another reason pauses matter. They interrupt emotional reactions. Imagine receiving unexpected criticism. Your heart races. Your mind instantly begins preparing a defense. If you speak immediately, your emotions will likely choose your words, not your judgment. But if you pause, even for a single breath, something remarkable happens. The emotional wave begins to settle. Your thinking returns, and suddenly, you have choices. You can respond instead of react. That difference may only take a few seconds, yet it can completely change the outcome of a conversation. People often regret words spoken in anger. Very few regret taking one extra moment to think. Patience is not hesitation. It is preparation. It gives your ideas time to become stronger. It allows your emotions to become quieter. And it reminds everyone around you that you are leading your words instead of letting your words lead you. The next time you feel pressure to answer immediately, resist the urge. Take one slow breath, organize your thoughts, then speak. You may discover that the shortest pause creates the strongest response. Chapter 4. Listen until people reveal what they never intended to say. Most people think listening means staying quiet. It doesn't. Anyone can remain silent. Very few people truly listen. The difference is enormous. Imagine meeting someone for the first time. You ask, "So, what do you do?" Before they finish answering, you're already thinking about your next question. You're waiting for your turn to speak. You're searching for something interesting to say about yourself. On the surface, the conversation feels normal, but in reality, neither person is fully present. Both are simply taking turns talking. This happens everywhere. At dinner tables, in offices, between close friends, even between people who genuinely care about one another. Listening has quietly become one of the rarest skills in modern communication. Not because people don't care, but because their minds are constantly busy preparing answers, busy judging, busy comparing experiences, busy trying to sound intelligent. When your mind is occupied, you stop noticing the small details that reveal how someone truly feels. A slight hesitation, a change in tone, a forced smile, a sentence that begins confidently, then suddenly becomes uncertain. Those moments often reveal far more than the actual words. Think about the last time someone told you, "I'm fine." The words sounded positive, but their voice didn't. Their eyes looked away, their shoulders dropped. You immediately sensed something wasn't right. Why? Because human communication is much bigger than language. Words tell you what people choose to say. Behavior often tells you what they cannot hide. Strong communicators understand this. They don't listen only for information, they listen for emotion. They notice what changes. They notice what repeats. They notice what people avoid talking about. Sometimes, the longest answer in a conversation isn't the most important one. Sometimes, it's the question someone refuses to answer, or the topic they immediately change. Silence often carries meaning. Avoidance carries meaning. Even confidence can carry meaning. Imagine interviewing two job candidates. Both claim they're confident leaders. The first immediately begins listing achievements. The second pauses, smiles slightly, then starts talking about the team's success before mentioning their own. Neither answer is automatically right or wrong, but each tells you something different. People reveal themselves long before they realize they're doing it. That's why curiosity is far more valuable than assumptions. Many conversations fail because people stop listening too early. They hear one sentence and instantly believe they understand the whole story. But every person carries experiences you cannot see. Every opinion has a history. Every fear has a beginning. Every belief was shaped somewhere. The moment you assume you already know someone, you stop discovering who they really are. Curiosity keeps conversations alive. Judgment quietly ends them. There is another habit that separates exceptional listeners. They ask better questions. Most questions produce predictable answers. How was your day? Good. What do you do? I'm an engineer. The conversation quickly reaches a dead end. Instead, ask questions that invite reflection. What part of your work do you enjoy the most? What experience changed the way you think? What surprised you this year? Suddenly, people stop giving rehearsed answers. They begin sharing real experiences. And something remarkable happens. When people feel genuinely heard, they naturally begin trusting you. Not because you impressed them, because you gave them something increasingly rare, your full attention. The greatest irony of communication is that people who desperately want to be interesting often spend too much time talking. The people everyone remembers usually spend more time making others feel understood. Influence doesn't begin when people admire your intelligence. It begins when people feel safe enough to lower their guard. And that only happens when they believe you're truly listening. Chapter 5. Control your emotions before they control your words. Every difficult conversation begins with two voices, the one coming from your mouth and the one inside your head. Most people pay attention only to the first. The strongest communicators master the second. Imagine receiving an email that feels unfair. Someone criticizes your work, questions your decisions, or blames you for something you didn't do. Almost instantly, your heart beats faster, your jaw tightens, your mind begins writing a response before you've even finished reading. In that moment, you believe you're thinking clearly. Usually, you're not. You're reacting. Emotion has quietly taken control, and when emotion leads, reason struggles to catch up. This is why so many conversations end with words people wish they could take back. Not because they intended to hurt someone, but because they allowed a temporary feeling to make a permanent decision. Think about the arguments you've regretted most. The problem probably wasn't that you spoke. The problem was when you spoke. There is a simple truth many people overlook. Strong emotions create narrow thinking. When you're angry, you notice only what supports your anger. When you're afraid, you notice only what confirms your fear. When your pride feels threatened, every sentence sounds like an attack. The conversation hasn't changed. Your perception has. That's why emotional control is not about hiding your feelings. It's about refusing to let those feelings become your leader. Many people imagine calm people simply don't get upset. That's rarely true. They feel frustration, disappointment, embarrassment, just like everyone else. The difference is what happens next. Instead of reacting immediately, they create space between the emotion and the response. That space may only last a few seconds, but inside those seconds, everything changes. Your breathing slows, your thoughts become clearer, your perspective becomes wider, and suddenly you have options. You can ask another question. You can clarify instead of accuse. You can solve instead of escalating. That is emotional intelligence in action. Imagine a manager whose employee makes a costly mistake. One response is immediate anger. Voices rise. Blame spreads. The employee becomes defensive. Nothing is learned. Another manager experiences the same situation. They're just as disappointed. But instead of exploding, they ask, "Walk me through what happened." Now the conversation moves toward understanding instead of conflict. The mistake still exists, but now it becomes an opportunity to improve. The emotion didn't disappear. It simply stopped controlling the direction of the conversation. There is another emotional trap that catches many people: taking everything personally. Someone disagrees with your idea. You assume they're rejecting you. Someone gives feedback. You hear criticism instead of guidance. Someone looks distracted. You believe you've done something wrong. Our minds naturally create stories. Unfortunately, those stories are often incomplete. The truth is, people are usually thinking far more about themselves than about you. The colleague who sounded impatient may have received bad news that morning. The friend who seemed distant may simply be exhausted. The stranger who interrupted you may be carrying a burden you'll never see. When you stop assuming every uncomfortable moment is about you, conversations become much lighter. You become less defensive, more curious, more patient, and far more difficult to provoke. Emotional control is not weakness, it is quiet strength, because anyone can lose their temper, anyone can raise their voice, anyone can react. Very few people can remain composed when everyone else is losing control, and those are the people others naturally begin to trust. Not because they always have the perfect answer, but because they create stability, even when everything around them feels uncertain. Chapter 6: The Quiet Confidence That Commands Respect. Have you ever met someone who walked into a room, said very little, yet somehow became the center of everyone's attention? They weren't the loudest. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They weren't constantly proving how smart they were. Yet people naturally listened. That kind of presence isn't an accident. It's the result of quiet confidence. Unfortunately, many people confuse confidence with performance. They believe confidence means speaking first, having an answer for everything, winning every debate, never admitting uncertainty. But real confidence looks very different. Real confidence doesn't need constant evidence. It doesn't search for approval. It doesn't panic when someone disagrees. Imagine two people being challenged during a discussion. The first immediately becomes defensive. They interrupt, raise their voice, repeat the same point over and over, not because they're certain, but because they're afraid of appearing wrong. The second person listens. They remain calm. They consider the other perspective. If new evidence appears, they're willing to change their mind. Not because they're weak, because they aren't afraid of the truth. That is confidence. Confidence is not the absence of doubt. It's the ability to move forward without being controlled by doubt. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to appear confident. They rehearse clever responses, practice sounding impressive, hide every mistake. Yet the harder they try, the more unnatural they become. People notice that because confidence cannot be performed for very long. Eventually, the mask begins to crack. Authenticity lasts much longer than performance. One of the strongest signs of confidence is comfort with silence. Imagine someone asks you a difficult question. Instead of rushing to fill the silence, you pause, you think, then you answer slowly. That pause doesn't make you appear uncertain. It often makes you appear thoughtful. People instinctively trust those who don't seem desperate to speak. Another sign of quiet confidence is the willingness to say, "I don't know." Many people avoid those three words. They fear appearing inexperienced. So they guess, they exaggerate, or they pretend. Ironically, that usually damages credibility far more than honesty ever could. The most respected experts understand something important. Nobody knows everything. Admitting uncertainty doesn't reduce trust. Pretending certainty where none exists often does. Confidence also changes the way you handle disagreement. Imagine someone completely rejects your opinion. If your confidence depends on being right, you'll feel personally attacked. But if your confidence comes from knowing your own values, disagreement becomes information, not a threat. You become curious instead of defensive. You ask questions instead of making accusations. You search for understanding instead of victory. That shift changes every conversation because conversations are rarely won through force. They're won through clarity. There is another habit quietly associated with confidence, the ability to remain consistent. Many people become different versions of themselves depending on who's watching. Around successful people, they become nervous. Around authority, they become unusually quiet. Around friends, they become someone else entirely. Over time, that inconsistency creates confusion, not only for others, but for themselves. Quiet confidence removes that burden. Your personality remains steady. Your values remain steady. Your words remain steady. Whether you're speaking to one person or 1,000, whether people agree with you or challenge everything you say. Because confidence built on external approval will always be fragile. Confidence built on internal character becomes difficult to shake. People may forget your exact words. They may forget your arguments, but they'll remember how they felt in your presence. Were you calm when everyone else became emotional? Were you respectful even when others became hostile? Did you make people feel safe enough to speak honestly? Those qualities create influence that lasts far longer than clever sentences ever will. True confidence is surprisingly quiet. It doesn't need attention. It doesn't chase recognition. It simply speaks with clarity, acts with consistency, and lets time prove the rest. Chapter 7. Speak less, say more. Many people believe that the more they speak, the more influence they have. But if that were true, the longest conversations would always be the most memorable. They rarely are. Think about the most powerful advice you've ever received. It probably wasn't an hour-long speech. It may have been one sentence, one observation, one simple question. Sometimes, just a few carefully chosen words stay with us for years. Why? Because powerful communication isn't measured by the number of words you use. It's measured by the impact those words create. Imagine asking someone a simple question. Instead of answering directly, they begin telling unrelated stories. They repeat the same point several different ways. They explain details you never asked about. After a few minutes, you begin losing interest. Not because the information lacks value, but because your brain struggles to find the main idea. Clarity disappears beneath unnecessary words. This happens more often than people realize. Many people don't speak to communicate. They speak to prove they're knowledgeable, to prove they're experienced, to prove they deserve respect. Ironically, the harder they try to prove themselves, the less convincing they become. Confidence rarely feels the need to advertise itself. A mountain never tells you it's tall. It simply stands there. Strong communication works the same way. The message should carry the weight, not the performance. Before speaking, ask yourself something simple. Does this sentence make my point clearer or simply longer? That question alone can transform the way you communicate. Most conversations contain words that add nothing, extra explanations, repeated opinions, fillers designed only to avoid silence. When you remove those, your ideas become stronger. Imagine reading a book filled with unnecessary pages. The important chapters would become harder to find. Conversations work the same way. Every unnecessary sentence weakens the ones that truly matter. Great communicators edit themselves constantly, not because they're hiding information, because they respect the listener's attention. Attention is limited. Every conversation is asking someone to invest that attention in you. The clearer you are, the more willing people become to keep listening. There is another reason shorter communication feels more powerful. It creates curiosity. Imagine someone says, "I learned something today that completely changed the way I think about success." Then they stop. Almost immediately, you want to know more. Now imagine they spend 10 minutes explaining every detail before reaching the point. The curiosity disappears. People value what they discover, not simply what they're told. Leaving space for curiosity allows the listener to participate. Instead of feeling like they're receiving a lecture, they feel like they're uncovering an idea alongside you. Questions can be even more powerful than answers. Imagine two leaders facing the same problem. The first immediately announces the solution. The second asks, "What do you think we're missing?" Within seconds, the room begins thinking differently. People stop waiting for instructions. They begin searching for answers. One person creates followers, the other creates thinkers. That's the power of a well-placed question. Questions invite engagement. Statements often invite resistance. Another habit separates memorable communicators from forgettable ones. They finish speaking before people stop listening. Most people continue talking long after their point has already landed. They repeat it. They explain it again. They add one more example, then another. Eventually, the original message loses its strength. Think about a favorite song. If the chorus repeated 20 times, it would quickly lose its impact. Conversations follow the same principle. Sometimes the strongest ending is knowing exactly when to stop. People don't remember conversations because they were long. They remember conversations because they felt meaningful. A single clear idea, expressed with confidence, will always outlast 100 unnecessary words. The goal isn't to speak more. The goal is to leave people thinking long after you finish speaking. Chapter 8. Learn to influence without trying to win. Most people enter conversations with a hidden goal: to be right, to prove a point, to change someone's mind. It sounds reasonable until you realize something surprising. The harder you try to win, the more resistance you often create. Imagine you're discussing an important topic with a friend. You present your argument. They disagree. Instead of becoming curious, you immediately search for more evidence, more facts, more examples. Soon, neither of you is listening anymore. You're simply collecting reasons to defend your own position. The conversation slowly turns into a contest, not a search for truth. This happens every day, not because people are dishonest, because the human mind naturally protects its own beliefs. When someone feels attacked, their first instinct isn't understanding, it's defense. The moment people begin defending themselves, learning becomes almost impossible. That's why influence rarely begins with persuasion. It begins with understanding. Before trying to change someone's opinion, ask yourself, do I truly understand why they believe what they believe? Most people skip that question entirely. They assume disagreement comes from ignorance. Sometimes it does. Often, it comes from different experiences, different fears, different priorities. Imagine two people discussing money. One grew up in a family that struggled every month. Saving became survival. The other grew up surrounded by entrepreneurs. Taking financial risks became normal. Years later, both reach adulthood. Both believe their approach is obvious. Neither realizes their beliefs were shaped long before they consciously chose them. Understanding this changes everything. Instead of asking, "How can I prove I'm right?" you begin asking, "What experiences brought this person to this conclusion?" That question creates empathy. And empathy opens doors that logic alone cannot. Another mistake many people make is assuming louder arguments are stronger arguments. They're not. Volume often hides insecurity. Calmness communicates confidence. Think about someone who never allows you to finish a sentence. They interrupt, correct every detail, challenge every opinion. Eventually, you stop sharing your thoughts. Not because you've changed your mind, because you've stopped feeling heard. Now imagine someone different. They let you finish. They ask thoughtful questions. They summarize what you've said before, offering their own perspective. Even if you disagree, you feel respected. Which person are you more likely to listen to? The answer is almost always the second. Respect creates openness. Pressure creates resistance. One of the most powerful phrases in any conversation is surprisingly simple. Help me understand. Those three words change the emotional direction of almost every discussion. Instead of creating opposition, they create collaboration. Instead of inviting defense, they invite explanation. People naturally lower their guard when they feel understood. There is another habit that quietly increases influence, acknowledging truth wherever you find it. Suppose someone criticizes one part of your idea. Instead of rejecting everything they say, you respond, "That's a fair point." Immediately, the conversation changes. You're no longer fighting to protect your ego. You're working together to find a better answer. Ironically, admitting a small truth often makes people trust your larger message even more, because honesty creates credibility. Pretending to be right about everything does the opposite. It reminds people that you're protecting an image, not pursuing the truth. Influential people aren't obsessed with winning arguments. They're obsessed with making better decisions. Sometimes that means changing their own minds. Sometimes it means admitting they overlooked something. Sometimes it means leaving a conversation with more questions than answers. That isn't weakness, it's growth. The strongest communicators understand that every conversation offers two possible victories. You can win against the other person, or you can win together with them. Only one of those victories strengthens relationships. Only one creates lasting influence. The next time you disagree with someone, pause before preparing your next argument. Instead, try understanding their story first. You may discover that changing someone's mind often begins with showing them that you're willing to understand theirs first. Chapter 9. Your body speaks before you do. Long before people hear your words, they've already begun forming an opinion about you, not because they're judging unfairly, because that's how the human brain works. In every conversation, people are constantly asking silent questions. Can I trust this person? Do they believe what they're saying? Should I pay attention? Surprisingly, those questions are often answered before the first sentence is finished. Imagine meeting two strangers. The first walks into the room with hurried movements. Their eyes constantly shift around. Their shoulders are tense. They speak quickly, as if they're racing against time. The second person enters quietly. Their movements are relaxed. They make comfortable eye contact. They wait for the right moment before speaking. Neither person has introduced themselves. Yet you've already formed different impressions. Why? Because communication begins with presence. Words simply confirm what people are already feeling. Many people spend years improving what they say. Very few improve how they carry themselves. Yet your posture, your facial expressions, your pace, even the way you breathe, constantly communicate messages you may not realize you're sending. Think about the last time someone said, "I'm completely fine," but their arms were crossed. Their smile disappeared almost instantly. Their voice sounded flat. You probably believed their body, not their words. Because when verbal and nonverbal messages disagree, people almost always trust behavior first. That doesn't happen consciously. It's automatic. Your brain has evolved to notice inconsistencies. When someone's words say confidence, but their behavior says fear, people feel uncertain, not because they know exactly what's wrong, but because something doesn't match. This is why genuine confidence cannot be faked for long. You might control your words, but your body often reveals what your mind is trying to hide. That isn't bad news. It's an opportunity, because changing your state often begins by changing your behavior. Imagine standing before an important presentation. Your breathing becomes shallow, your shoulders tighten, your mind starts imagining everything that could go wrong. Most people assume those physical reactions are simply consequences of nervousness. In reality, the relationship works both ways. The way you use your body influences the way you think. Slow your breathing, relax your shoulders, Stand balanced instead of collapsing inward. Suddenly, your mind receives a different message. Not that danger has disappeared, but that you're capable of handling it. There is another mistake many people make without noticing. They move constantly while speaking. They tap their fingers, shift their weight, adjust their clothing, play with a pen. Each movement seems insignificant. Together, they create the impression of uncertainty. Stillness has power, not complete stillness, but purposeful stillness. People naturally pay attention to movements that have intention. When every gesture means something, every gesture becomes more meaningful. The same is true for eye contact. Many people believe confidence means staring directly into someone's eyes without looking away. Real communication is much more natural. Comfortable eye contact isn't about dominance. It's about presence. It quietly tells the other person, I'm here with you. Not distracted, not searching for approval, not looking for the quickest escape, just fully engaged in this moment. That simple habit builds trust faster than many people realize. Your voice also communicates far beyond your words. People often focus on what they're saying while ignoring how they're saying it. A rushed voice creates urgency. A shaky voice creates uncertainty. A calm voice creates stability. Notice the people you naturally trust during difficult situations. Doctors, experienced pilots, emergency responders, strong leaders. They don't usually speak faster when pressure increases. They slow down, not because the situation is less serious, because calmness helps other people think clearly. Your pace influences everyone around you. Emotion spreads. Calmness spreads too. The most influential people understand this. They don't borrow the emotional energy of the room. They shape it. Without demanding attention, without raising their voice, without forcing anyone to follow, they simply become the calmest presence available. And before long, others naturally begin matching their rhythm. People hear your words, but they experience your presence. And in the end, presence is often remembered long after the conversation itself has faded. Chapter 10. The Art of Asking Questions That Change People. Most people believe influence comes from having better answers. In reality, some of the most influential people in history became powerful because they asked better questions. Think back to a conversation that stayed with you for years. There's a good chance it wasn't because someone delivered a brilliant speech. It was because someone asked you a question you couldn't stop thinking about. A single question can quietly change the direction of a life. Imagine a manager speaking with an employee whose performance has declined. One manager says, "You need to work harder." The conversation ends almost immediately. Another manager asks, "What's been making your work more difficult lately?" Now something different happens. Instead of defending themselves, the employee begins reflecting. They explain pressures no one else noticed, the problem that seemed obvious. Turns out to be something completely different. Nothing changed except the question. Yet the entire conversation moved in a new direction. Questions have a unique power. They don't force people to think. They invite people to think. And people are far more likely to accept conclusions they discover themselves than conclusions handed to them by someone else. That's why arguments often fail. They attempt to replace another person's thinking. Questions encourage people to examine it. Imagine trying to convince a friend to take better care of their health. You could spend an hour explaining nutrition, quoting research, sharing statistics. Or you could simply ask, how do you want to feel 5 years from now? Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about your opinion. It's about their future. The motivation begins coming from within, not from you. That is genuine influence. Many people ask questions, not because they want answers, but because they already know what they hope to hear. People notice that. Leading questions often feel manipulative. Curious questions feel sincere. The difference is easy to recognize. One seeks confirmation. The other seeks understanding. The best communicators remain genuinely curious, even when they're confident, especially when they're confident, because confidence without curiosity quickly becomes arrogance. There is another mistake that weakens conversations: asking too many questions without truly listening to the answers. Imagine someone asking you 5 questions in a row. Before you've finished answering the first, they're already asking the second. The conversation starts feeling like an interview, not a connection. Strong communicators understand that every good question deserves space. Space for thought, space for emotion, space for silence. Sometimes, the silence after a question is more valuable than the question itself. People often discover what they really think while searching for an answer. If you interrupt that process, you interrupt their thinking. Patience transforms ordinary questions into meaningful ones. Another powerful habit is asking questions that encourage possibility instead of limitation. Many people ask, "Why does this always happen to me?" Notice where that question leads. It searches for reasons to stay stuck. Now change the question. What can I learn from this? Or, what's one small step I can take today? The situation hasn't changed, but the direction of your thinking has. Questions shape attention, and attention shapes behavior. The quality of your life is often influenced by the quality of the questions you ask yourself every day. Successful people rarely have all the answers, but they consistently ask better questions. Questions that challenge assumptions. Questions that uncover blind spots. Questions that reveal opportunities hidden inside problems. There is one final lesson about questions that many people overlook. Sometimes, the most powerful question is the simplest one. Can you tell me more? Those 4 words communicate something rare. They tell another person, I'm interested, I'm listening. What you have to say matters. Very few gifts are more valuable than making someone feel genuinely heard. And when people feel heard, they naturally become more open, more honest, more willing to trust. Influence isn't always built through speaking brilliantly. Sometimes, it's built by asking one thoughtful question, then having the patience to listen to the answer. Chapter 11. Why people trust some voices instantly. Trust is one of the few things you cannot demand. The harder you ask for it, the further away it often becomes. Think about the people whose advice you value most. Why do you believe them? Is it because they always have the perfect answer? Probably not. Is it because they've never made mistakes? Certainly not. You trust them because their words, their actions, and their character move in the same direction. Consistency creates credibility. Imagine a friend who constantly promises to call, but rarely does. At first, you believe them. After several disappointments, something changes. The next promise sounds different, not because the words changed, because trust has quietly faded. Now imagine someone else. They make fewer promises. Sometimes they even say, I'm not sure I can make it. But whenever they give their word, they follow through. Over time, you stop questioning them. You simply believe them. That's how trust grows, not through dramatic moments, but through countless small acts of consistency. Communication works exactly the same way. Every conversation is either strengthening trust or slowly weakening it. Many people think trust is built through confidence. In reality, confidence without integrity creates suspicion. Imagine someone constantly telling you how honest they are, how reliable they are, how much you should believe them. After a while, you begin wondering why they keep repeating it, because genuine trust rarely introduces itself. It quietly proves itself. Actions have a way of speaking that words never can. One fulfilled promise carries more influence than 100 impressive speeches. There is another habit that quietly destroys credibility: exaggeration. People often believe stretching the truth makes their stories more interesting. They make every challenge sound impossible, every success sound extraordinary, every coincidence sound unbelievable. At first, people may be impressed. Eventually, they begin questioning everything. Credibility disappears one exaggeration at a time. The opposite is also true. When people know you speak carefully, when they know you rarely overstate things, your words begin carrying greater weight because they understand something important. If you choose to say it, it probably matters. That kind of reputation cannot be purchased. It must be earned. Trust also depends on honesty during uncomfortable moments. Imagine making an important mistake at work. One person immediately searches for someone else to blame. Another calmly says, "That was my responsibility. I'll fix it." Which person would you trust with greater responsibility in the future? Most people answer without hesitation. Owning mistakes doesn't reduce credibility. Avoiding responsibility often does. People don't expect perfection. They expect accountability. Ironically, admitting weakness often becomes a sign of strength. Because honesty is difficult, defensiveness is easy. There is another quality that strengthens trust in quiet ways. Predictability. Not becoming boring, becoming dependable. People know how you'll respond under pressure. They know your values won't suddenly change because circumstances become difficult. They know success won't make you arrogant. Failure won't make you dishonest. Praise won't make you careless. Criticism won't make you cruel. That emotional consistency creates deep confidence in others. People begin feeling safe around you, safe enough to ask difficult questions, safe enough to disagree, safe enough to admit mistakes. That safety becomes the foundation of meaningful communication. The strongest relationships, whether in business, friendship, leadership, or family, are built on one invisible question: can I rely on this person? Every conversation answers that question. Little by little, long before people remember your intelligence, they remember your reliability, because words may capture attention, but trust is what keeps people listening. Chapter 12. Influence begins with understanding yourself. Many people spend their lives trying to understand everyone else, how they think, how they communicate, how they make decisions. Yet they rarely stop to ask a much more important question. Do I truly understand myself? It sounds simple, but it may be one of the most difficult questions you'll ever answer. Imagine someone who becomes frustrated every time they're interrupted. They assume other people are disrespectful. Over time, they begin expecting every conversation to end in conflict. What they never realize is that the interruption isn't the real problem. It's what the interruption means to them. Perhaps years ago, they constantly felt ignored. Perhaps they grew up believing their voice didn't matter. Now, every interruption feels like proof that nothing has changed. The present conversation has quietly become connected to the past. This happens more often than we realize. Our reactions are rarely created by a single moment. They're built from thousands of moments that came before. Every disappointment, every success, every fear, every belief. Together, they create the invisible lens through which we see the world. Two people can experience the exact situation and leave with completely different conclusions. One sees rejection, the other sees feedback. One sees failure, the other sees a lesson. The event is identical. The interpretation is different. That interpretation is where influence begins. Because before you can manage conversations, you must learn to manage the stories your own mind creates. Our minds are incredibly skilled at filling in missing information. Someone doesn't return your message. You assume they're upset. A colleague walks past without saying hello. You wonder if you've done something wrong. A friend cancels dinner. You begin questioning the friendship. Notice what happened. Facts disappeared. Stories appeared. And once those stories feel real, our emotions begin responding to them, not to reality. Strong communicators recognize this pattern. Instead of immediately believing every thought, they become curious about it. They ask, do I know this is true, or am I simply assuming? That single question prevents countless misunderstandings. Self-awareness also means recognizing your emotional patterns. Some people become impatient under pressure. Others become quiet. Some avoid conflict completely. Others create conflict without realizing it. None of these patterns appear overnight. They develop slowly, repeated again and again, until they begin feeling like personality. But habits are not identity. They are behaviors, and behaviors can change. Imagine someone who has spent years believing, "I'm just not confident." Because of that belief, they avoid speaking, avoid leadership, avoid opportunities. Eventually, the belief becomes self-fulfilling, not because it was true, because it shaped every decision they made. Now, imagine replacing that belief with a different question. What would a confident version of me do in this situation? Suddenly, the focus changes. Instead of defending an old identity, you're building a new one. Small actions begin replacing old assumptions. One conversation, one decision, one brave moment at a time. Real growth rarely happens all at once. It happens quietly, often unnoticed, until one day you realize situations that once frightened you now feel completely ordinary. Another important part of self-awareness is accepting that you won't always be understood. Many people exhaust themselves trying to control how others see them. They explain, clarify, defend, correct every misunderstanding. Eventually, they discover something difficult. You cannot control another person's interpretation. You can only control your own intention. That realization is incredibly freeing. It allows you to focus on what truly belongs to you: your character, your effort, your honesty, your consistency. Everything else is outside your control. The most influential people aren't obsessed with managing every opinion. They're committed to living in a way that makes those opinions less important. Because lasting influence is never built on pretending to be someone else. It is built on becoming more completely yourself. When your thoughts become clearer, your words become calmer. When your values become stronger, your decisions become simpler. And when you finally understand yourself, you stop searching for approval everywhere else. That quiet certainty changes the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you lead. And without realizing it, it changes the way the world begins responding to you. Chapter 13, the habit that makes people remember you. Every day, we meet dozens of people. Some conversations disappear within minutes. Others remain in our minds for years. Why? It isn't because someone said something extraordinary. More often, it's because they made us feel something extraordinary. Think about the people you remember most. Perhaps it was a teacher, a mentor, a colleague, or even a stranger you met for only a few minutes. Ask yourself a simple question. Do you remember every word they said? Probably not, but you almost certainly remember how you felt around them. You remember feeling understood, respected, encouraged, safe enough to be yourself. That is the hidden power of communication. People rarely remember conversations word for word. They remember emotional experiences. Imagine visiting two different stores. In the first, everything is efficient. The employee answers your questions, processes your payment, says goodbye. Nothing is wrong, but nothing stands out. The next day, you barely remember being there. Now imagine another store. The employee greets you with genuine warmth. They remember your name. They ask thoughtful questions. They notice something you mentioned weeks earlier. You leave feeling valued. The products may have been identical, yet the experience feels completely different. People return to places where they feel appreciated. The same is true for conversations. Everyone wants to feel significant, not superior, simply significant. To feel that their thoughts matter, that their experiences deserve attention, that their presence makes a difference. When you give someone that feeling, you become memorable, not because you're entertaining, because you're intentional. Many people enter conversations asking themselves, how can I impress this person? A better question is, how can I leave this person feeling better than when we started talking? That small shift changes everything. Instead of performing, you begin serving. Instead of seeking admiration, you begin creating value. Ironically, that often makes you far more impressive. There is another habit that quietly leaves lasting impressions. Remembering the small things: a person's favorite hobby, their child's name, a goal they mentioned months ago, an important event they were nervous about. The next time you meet, you ask about it. Immediately, they realize something unusual. You listened, not only during the conversation, but long after it ended. People notice that because genuine attention has become increasingly rare. You don't need a perfect memory. You simply need genuine interest. Interest naturally improves memory. When people matter to you, details become easier to remember. There is another reason people become unforgettable. They make others feel capable. Imagine sharing an idea with someone. Instead of dismissing it, they build on it. Instead of pointing out every weakness, they help you see the possibilities. You leave the conversation believing more in yourself than before. That feeling stays with you. Encouragement has remarkable power, not empty compliments, not exaggerated praise, real encouragement, the kind that recognizes effort, potential, growth. People rarely forget those who believed in them before they believed in themselves. Another habit separates memorable communicators. They give credit generously. When something succeeds, they acknowledge everyone involved. They don't need every spotlight. They don't compete for every compliment. Secure people understand something important. Recognition shared is not recognition lost. In fact, generosity often increases respect because people trust those who don't constantly seek personal glory. Finally, never underestimate the power of simple gratitude. A sincere thank you, a handwritten note, a message expressing appreciation. These small gestures often outlive expensive gifts or dramatic speeches. Why? Because gratitude tells people they mattered, and every human being longs to know that their presence made a difference. In the end, people won't remember every opinion you shared. They won't remember every story you told, but they will remember how they felt after spending time with you. If they leave feeling stronger, more understood, more hopeful, or more confident, then your words have accomplished something far greater than persuasion. They've created connection. And connection is what people remember long after the conversation ends. Chapter 14. Become the person others want to follow. Leadership begins long before anyone gives you a title. It begins long before your name appears on an office door, long before people call you a manager, a director, or a leader. Real leadership begins the moment people choose to trust your direction. That choice cannot be forced. It must be earned. Many people believe leaders are simply born with unusual confidence, that they naturally enjoy attention, that they always know the right answer. Reality is far less dramatic. The best leaders are rarely the ones trying hardest to lead. They're the ones people naturally begin following. Why? Because they create certainty when others feel uncertain. Imagine a group facing an unexpected problem. Everyone begins talking at once. Ideas collide. Frustration grows. No one seems to know what to do next. Then one person quietly says, "Let's slow down. First, let's understand exactly what's happening." The room becomes quieter, not because that person has solved the problem, but because they've given everyone something even more valuable: direction. People don't always need immediate answers. Often, they simply need someone who can bring clarity to confusion. That is leadership. Leadership is not controlling people. It is reducing uncertainty. Another common misunderstanding is that leaders must always appear strong. They don't. True leaders are comfortable admitting when they don't know something. Imagine a pilot flying through unexpected turbulence. Would you trust one who pretends everything is perfect while clearly struggling? Or one who calmly says, "We're experiencing some turbulence. We've trained for situations like this. Here's what we're going to do." Honesty creates confidence. Pretending creates fear. People don't expect perfection. They expect steadiness. There is another quality that quietly separates respected leaders: responsibility. When something succeeds, they praise the team. When something fails, they examine themselves first. That doesn't mean accepting blame for everything. It means refusing to hide behind excuses. Excuses protect your ego. Responsibility builds your character. Imagine two business owners after losing an important client. The first blames the economy, the competition, bad luck. The second asks, "What could we have done differently?" One searches for someone to blame. The other searches for something to improve. Only one continues growing. Leadership always begins with ownership, not ownership of other people. Ownership of yourself, your attitude, your decisions, your habits, your example. People notice what you tolerate. They notice what you reward. Most importantly, they notice what you do when no one is watching. Your behavior quietly gives others permission to behave the same way. If you panic, panic spreads. If you gossip, gossip spreads. If you remain calm, calmness spreads. Leadership is contagious, whether you intend it or not. There is another lesson many people overlook. The strongest leaders don't create dependence, they create confidence in others. Imagine teaching someone a new skill. You could solve every problem for them, answer every question, make every decision. They would always need you. Or you could teach them how to think, how to solve problems, how to trust their own judgment. Eventually, they no longer depend on you. Some people fear that outcome. Great leaders celebrate it because their goal was never to become indispensable. Their goal was to help someone else become capable. Influence that depends entirely on your presence is fragile. Influence that continues after you've left is leadership. Think about the people who changed your life. Perhaps they gave you advice years ago. Perhaps they believed in you when you doubted yourself. Perhaps they challenged you to think differently. Even if you never see them again, their influence remains, not because they stayed beside you, because they changed something within you. That is the highest form of leadership. Leaving people stronger than you found them, helping them see possibilities they couldn't yet see, giving them confidence they didn't know they possessed. Titles may earn authority, position may earn obedience, but only character earns lasting influence. And in the end, people don't follow someone because they're required to. They follow because they believe that walking beside that person will help them become better themselves. Chapter 15. The conversation you have with yourself every day. You have thousands of conversations. Most of them happen in complete silence. No one hears them. No one responds to them. Yet those conversations shape nearly every decision you make. They're the conversations you have with yourself. Imagine making a small mistake during an important presentation. Before anyone else says a word, your mind begins speaking. I ruined it. They're probably disappointed. I'm never good at this. Within seconds, those thoughts begin feeling like facts. Your confidence drops. Your posture changes. Your voice becomes uncertain. Nothing outside of you changed. Only the conversation inside your mind. This is why your internal dialogue matters so much. It becomes the foundation of every external conversation you'll ever have. Many people believe confidence comes from success. Often, success begins with the stories we repeatedly tell ourselves. Think about someone learning to ride a bicycle. If every failed attempt becomes proof that they're incapable, they'll eventually stop trying. Now imagine someone else. They fall just as often. They lose balance just as many times. Yet after every mistake, they tell themselves, I'm getting closer. Same experience, different interpretation. Eventually, different outcome. The way you explain your life to yourself becomes the way you live it. Our minds naturally repeat familiar thoughts, not because they're true, because they're familiar. If you've spent years saying, I'm terrible at meeting new people, your brain begins searching for evidence to support that belief. Every awkward conversation becomes proof. Every uncomfortable moment becomes another confirmation. Meanwhile, every successful interaction is quietly ignored. The mind protects the stories it already believes, whether those stories help us or hold us back. That's why awareness is so important. The next time you notice a negative thought, pause for a moment. Instead of asking, is this how I feel? Ask, is this actually true? Those are two very different questions. Feelings are real, but they are not always accurate. You may feel incapable. That doesn't mean you are. You may feel rejected. That doesn't mean you've been rejected. You may feel like giving up. That doesn't mean you should. Learning to separate feelings from facts is one of the greatest forms of emotional freedom. There is another quiet habit that changes the way people communicate. They stop speaking to themselves in ways they would never speak to someone they love. Imagine your closest friend makes a mistake. Would you say, you're a complete failure? You'll never improve. What's wrong with you? Probably not. You'd encourage them. Help them learn. Remind them that one mistake doesn't define their future. So why do so many people speak to themselves with a level of cruelty? they would never direct toward another human being? Compassion is not something reserved only for others. You deserve it as well. Being compassionate toward yourself doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means recognizing that growth requires patience. Every expert was once a beginner. Every confident speaker was once nervous. Every respected leader was once uncertain. Progress has always looked imperfect. Another powerful habit is changing the language you use. Instead of saying, I have to do this, try saying, I get to do this. Instead of, I always fail, try, I'm still learning. These may seem like small changes, but language directs attention, and attention shapes experience. Over time, small changes in language create large changes in identity. You begin acting differently, not because the world changed, but because your relationship with yourself changed. The conversations inside your mind eventually become visible to everyone around you. People notice your confidence, your calmness, your resilience, not because you pretend to possess those qualities, because you've slowly built them. One thought at a time, the way you speak to yourself today will quietly become the way you speak to others tomorrow. Choose those words carefully, because no voice will influence your life more deeply than your own. Chapter 16. Your influence is built one conversation at a time. By now, you may have noticed something surprising. None of these chapters asked you to become louder. None encouraged you to dominate conversations. None suggested memorizing clever phrases or persuasive tricks, because lasting influence has never depended on any of those things. Real influence is much quieter. It grows slowly, conversation by conversation, decision by decision, habit by habit. Imagine planting a tree. On the first day, nothing seems different. A week later, very little has changed. Even after several months, the growth is almost impossible to notice. Yet beneath the surface, the roots continue expanding. One day, years later, that tiny seed has become something strong enough to survive storms. Communication develops the same way. You don't become an exceptional communicator after one conversation, or one book, or one presentation. You become one through repetition. Every difficult discussion teaches patience. Every disagreement teaches perspective. Every mistake teaches awareness. Every meaningful connection teaches trust. The greatest communicators aren't people who never make mistakes. They're people who never stop learning from them. Think about your own life. How many conversations would you change if you could go back? Perhaps there were moments when you spoke too quickly. Moments when you stayed silent even though you had something important to say. Moments when pride prevented you from apologizing, or fear prevented you from speaking honestly. Everyone carries conversations they wish had gone differently. The purpose of those memories isn't regret, it's growth. They remind us that communication is a skill, not a fixed talent. Skills improve through practice, not perfection. There will still be conversations where people misunderstand you, moments when your emotions get the better of you, times when your message doesn't land the way you hoped. That's part of being human. The goal is not perfection. The goal is progress. Every conversation offers another opportunity to listen more carefully, to think more clearly, to speak more intentionally, to become a little more patient than you were yesterday. Those small improvements rarely feel dramatic, but over time, they completely transform the way people experience you. Imagine meeting someone today, and then meeting them again 5 years from now. They notice something different. You seem calmer, more thoughtful, more confident, not louder, not more aggressive, simply more certain, more present, more comfortable with yourself. That transformation won't happen because of one extraordinary moment. It will happen because of thousands of ordinary moments handled with greater wisdom. There is one final truth worth remembering. Influence is not measured by how many people agree with you. It is measured by the quality of the impact you leave behind. Did your words create understanding or confusion? Did your presence reduce fear or increase it? Did people leave feeling smaller or stronger? Those are the questions that matter. because every conversation leaves something behind. Sometimes it leaves encouragement. Sometimes it leaves doubt. Sometimes it leaves hope. And sometimes it leaves a lesson someone carries for the rest of their life. You may never know which conversation changes another person's future. That is why every conversation deserves your best, not your perfect self, your present self. The version of you willing to listen before speaking, to understand before judging, to remain calm when others become emotional, to value truth more than pride, and connection more than victory. Those choices may appear small, yet together they shape a reputation, a character, a life. Long after people forget the exact words you spoke, they will remember the way you made them think, the way you made them feel, and the example you quietly set through your actions. That is what powerful communication has always been. Not the ability to control other people, but the ability to consistently bring out the best in yourself, so that others naturally become better in your presence. And perhaps that is the greatest influence anyone could ever hope to have. Conclusion. Take a moment before you move on with your day, before the next conversation begins. Pause and ask yourself one question. Who have you been trying to become? Someone who always has the perfect answer. Someone who wins every argument. Someone who never feels nervous. Or someone whose words genuinely matter. Because those are very different goals. For most of our lives, we're taught how to speak. We're taught grammar, vocabulary, presentation skills. But very few people ever teach us how to think before speaking. How to listen without preparing our next response. How to remain calm when emotions try to take control. How to earn trust instead of demanding it. Yet those are the very habits that separate ordinary conversations from extraordinary ones. Think back to where this audiobook began. We imagined two people walking into the same room. One spoke for a long time, trying to convince everyone, trying to prove themselves. The other spoke with clarity, with patience, with purpose, and somehow everyone listened. Now you understand why. It was never about having a better voice. It was never about memorizing persuasive techniques. It was never about finding the perfect words. Influence was built long before that moment. Inside the mind, inside daily habits, inside countless small decisions no one else could see. Every time you choose curiosity over judgment, you become a stronger communicator. Every time you choose patience over reaction, you become a stronger leader. Every time you choose understanding over ego, people begin trusting you a little more. These moments may seem insignificant, but they accumulate, just as drops of water eventually shape stone. Small conversations slowly shape your character, and your character eventually shapes your life. There will still be days when you say the wrong thing. Days when emotions speak before wisdom. Days when misunderstandings happen despite your best intentions. Don't fear those moments. Learn from them. Every conversation, successful or unsuccessful, offers another opportunity to improve. Remember, the goal has never been perfection. The goal is awareness. Because awareness creates choice, and choice creates change. As you leave this audiobook, don't try to remember every sentence. You don't need to. Instead, remember the principles. Think before you speak. Listen to understand, not simply to reply. Stay calm when others lose control. Choose clarity over complexity. Ask better questions. Seek truth instead of victory. Lead through your example. Protect your integrity. Treat every person with genuine respect. And perhaps most importantly, pay attention to the conversation happening inside your own mind. Because that conversation quietly shapes every other conversation you'll ever have. Years from now, people probably won't remember the exact advice you gave them. They won't remember every story you shared or every opinion you expressed. But they will remember something far more important. They'll remember how they felt in your presence, whether they felt heard, whether they felt respected, whether they left believing a little more in themselves than when they arrived. That is influence, not controlling another person's mind, but helping another person discover their own. Not speaking the loudest, but speaking with honesty. not chasing attention, but becoming someone whose character naturally earns it. So the next time you enter a conversation, don't ask yourself, how can I impress this person? Instead, ask, how can I make this conversation meaningful? Because one meaningful conversation can change a relationship. One relationship can change a career. One decision can change a life. And sometimes a single sentence, spoken with clarity, kindness, and quiet confidence, can stay with someone forever. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope these ideas don't simply change the way you communicate. I hope they change the way you think. Because when your thinking changes, your words begin to change. When your words change, your relationships begin to change. And when your relationships change, your life quietly begins to change with them. Until next time, keep learning, keep listening, keep growing. And remember, the most influential voice you'll ever develop is not the loudest one. It's the one people trust.